حضراتكم ونعرض عليكم موضوع من أهم الموضوعات اللي بتهم شركاتنا. والحقيقة الموضوع ده خاص بشهادات المطابقة والاختبارات. ومعانا النهاردة شركة SGS. شركة SGS أحد الأعضاء اللي انضموا للمجلس التصدير الصناعات الغذائية كعضو عامل معانا كمقدم للخدمات. احنا الحقيقة مقدمي الخدمات معانا السنة دي حوالي أكتر من 20 شركة بيقدموا خدمات حصرية، بيقدموا أسعار خاصة، وبيقدموا يعني خدمات مخصوص لأعضاء المجلس التصديري للصناعات الغذائية. مختلف المجالات، يعني منها مجالات الفحص والمطابقة وخدمات الشحن والبنوك وغيرها من الخدمات اللي بتهم السادة المصدرين. الحقيقة ان احنا النهاردة بيسعدنا ان احنا معانا ميسز اسم مسز. موضوعنا هام للغاية، لأنه الحقيقة احنا بنتكلم النهاردة على شهادات المطابقة. أهمية الشهادة دي، أهمية دور المطابقة سواء في الفحص والاختبارات والشهادات الدولية. ومهم جدا ان احنا النهاردة هنتناول أو هيتم إلقاء الضوء على دول مهمة جدا في المنظومة التصديرية لمصر. فالنهارده الحقيقه هم هيقولوا لنا المتطلبات المختلفه لدول مثل الدول العربيه، بالذات انها بتمثل يعني هي اكبر التكتلات اللي احنا بنصدر لها. هنتكلم على الاتحاد الاوروبي، هنتكلم على اسواق بعينها زي اسواق الامارات، الخليج، هنتكلم طبعا على السعوديه واوروبا وانجلترا وغيرها. وهيتم القاء الضوء على ايه اهم المتطلبات والخطوات. وحضراتكم في الجوجل فورم اللي احنا كنا باعتينها لكم كان في أسئلة عديدة، وإن شاء الله هيتم الرد على هذه الأسئلة. العرض الحقيقة هيكون باللغة الإنجليزية، ولو في أي أسئلة لو تسمحوا تقدروا تحطوها باللغة العربية. بنحب نرحب بالأستاذ عبد العال السيد مدير عام SGS Egypt، وكل التيم بتاع SGS هنا في مصر هم معانا، وبرضه هيقدروا يجاوبوا معانا على جميع تساؤلات حضراتكم. تقدروا تبتدوا تحطوها على الشات، وإن شاء الله آخر البرزنتيشن هنرد على الأسئلة دي. Thank you very much, Mrs. Anna Teil-Gengel. As we discussed, we just welcomed our audience and had a short brief about the content of the presentation. And well, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for your time and effort. Please.
Thank you very much for inviting SGS and for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be able to present some of solutions to the audience here, which I know is very expert on food exports. And sorry for me not speaking Arabic, so I'll have to do it in English, but I have learned that you even would have experts in your team to speak perfect German. So I'm sure there is no problem in translation. Let us just get started. What I have thought, and based on discussion with our managing director, Abdelal El-Sayed from SGS Egypt, what could be of an interesting topic for you is basically, a few countries, a few export markets that might be interesting, and what could be the legal framework for you that you need to consider when you want to grow business. And so we'll talk a little bit about what are requirements in the GCC countries, UAE, Saudi Arabia, which I understand is very close to you and very important to you, but also the European Union, for which for some of you is an important market and which in many cases is a leading prescriber of requirements. And then, of course, the UK, but also a little bit an update on, how does it look for the US and for China as the major markets? And then, of course, there are many, many other markets that I'm sure you would have questions on. Also, just to clarify, I'm not going into each and every detail because this would need days and days, and I'm not the expert in every detail. But I can give you an overview so that you can understand in case of need where you could ask for which service and what are the main triggers. So if we look, and this is just something that I'm sure you know much better than I do, but what is the Egyptian export? What are the Egyptian trading partners? GCC, and you have agreements with the GCC countries, and you have various products that you export in these countries. Nothing new for you, and this is just even from the Egyptian Food Export Council publication from 4th of February. So shows the importance of this area. The European Union or the UK together, Egypt also has an agreement since 24, and basically it has been taken over by the UK, where you can have specific tariff agreements that you can export your products under to. What is maybe for the EU more important, and we'll talk about this later, is, what are the restrictions or the challenges that today Egypt or Egyptian products on the European market face. And we'll talk a little bit about the rapid alert system of the European Union and the pesticides and aflatoxins that we've seen Egyptian products have or potentially have some issues, and where maybe we can help to improve the situation. And then, of course, the US market is a specific topic, but your exports, again, I quote the Egypt Today from February 22nd, rose by 23%. So quite also an interesting market. And the leading categories there are chicken, sheep, beef products. And not to forget, because it's one of the largest importers of food products in general, is China. And I just wanted them to mention the new importer registration requirements and the specific attention to heavy metals. So let's go into the topic where we see, based on your strong growth in the past, again, I'm just quoting the successful development of Egyptian food exports, which different countries are in the different markets that you have and how we can deal with it. And I don't go through all the slides, just also in the sake of time, but also this is known, this is just the basis for the discussion after. If we talk about the GCC countries to start with, most of you will know when you export to the countries, whether it's GCC, US, Europe, China, there are some regulations behind. And for UAE, you have this Minister of Industry and Advanced Technology that is the responsible authority for the standardization, including the food standardization. And when you want to export to these countries, you need to meet those requirements. And for instance, the Emirates Conformity Assessment Scheme needs a certification for the regulated products or product categories, which are honey, milk, dairy products, juices, beverages, energy drink, any organic food. Chocolate is not on that list. And I know there is chocolate exports from Egypt to these areas, but chocolate requires mandatory salmonella testing. Another topic that you might be aware of is that French fries, for instance, that are manufactured in Egypt must have a hepatitis A testing for every batch before they're exported to Saudi Arabia. This is just to show you some of the complexities or some of the examples, when you look into these schemes. Another point is the Emirates Quality Mark, which is applicable for dairy products, water juices, and has a validity of 3 years. So these are the main things to consider for the UAE in general. Dubai, the municipality of Dubai, would have a separate food code that exporters have to consider, which provides a general, let's say, examples and framework, and which applies to all the directly imported products into Dubai from other Emirates or exported to other countries from Dubai. So if you transit in Dubai, you have to consider those things. There is an update of the latest version from 22nd of July, and again, different things to consider. Why I'm showing this, our colleagues in Dubai have specialized services then around this to support business people or exporters or traders or manufacturers to be compliant and to not have their products stuck. For instance, if you have the authority, if you want to get the authority approvals, you need to gather all the required documents, you need to upload it to the websites, you need to provide all the necessary technical product data, and then you need to follow up with the authorities if your files are handled and so on. I'm sure most of you will know this. SGS has created a service around this to help you to facilitate the way how this is working. For Saudi Arabia specifically, and I'm sure most of you are aware of this either, you have a certification scheme or you have a registration scheme first before your product can enter into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And then you have a certification scheme, which I will just show in a bit. But if you don't follow this for the products, and again, I come to fresh and processed fruits and vegetables because Egypt is a producer and the exporter of these products as well, but also of others, you cannot enter and you have delays in the customs. Again, here there is a registration process and it could take up to 15 days where SGS is able to support. The conformity assessment, so the certification process as such for Saudi Arabia works in the sense that, of course, we are reviewing, or you have any tech company in the area has to review all the application first. There's a documentary review of all the quality documents and certificates that are available on the specific products and facilities. Then we would have to do some testing, packing, marking, checking. Testing has to be done in 17 or 25 accredited laboratories, meaning this is a certain minimum quality requirement on the testing side. Then you would have the inspection of the containers that are loading, so the specific containers and sealing. And after that, a certificate will be issued which will allow you to enter your product into Saudi Arabia. Jumping from Saudi Arabia or the GCC countries to the European Union, the framework setup or the structure of the framework is quite different. And I think it's important to understand, while if you go back in Saudi Arabia, you have a batch or a shipment-related release certification system. The European Union has a complete different approach, which means, in general, basically, all food imports need to fulfill the same high standards as products produced inside the European Union itself. It doesn't say you have to have an import certification, but it just needs to fulfill the quality of the own produced products. And what is very important, the importer, which is basically the company that is putting the first time the products onto the market, is responsible to comply with all the requirements for the products that will be put onto the European market. And then it's not only the importer, it's basically everyone in the supply chain, but also the importer as the first legal partner in the import process is responsible that your products are complying with EU requirements. The control in the EU is not done mainly or only at the border, but it's basically decentralized, and you have the member states. So each and every member state, they will take samples, they will do maybe customs controls, whatever they think is necessary to check that the products are compliant. And unlike in the US, in Europe, you don't need an import broker or agent. So you can work directly with an importer or a retailer or whatever who is importing the product. Now, exporting to the EU, and I have checked a little bit some, let's say, what has happened with Egyptian products recently. It's important to understand the rapid alert system. The European Union has this famous RAS system, which basically all the member states that I mentioned earlier, that do their monitoring, they will input into that system anything that is not really compliant. So for Egypt, starting from January 21 until 2 days ago, I found 157 alerts for products coming from Egypt. And some of them have had border rejection. And just to show you quickly how this works, if it works. In the rapid alert system, you can go in, you can select, for instance, the country of origin. And if we select here, and I hope you can see this as well. Where do we have Egypt? Here we have Egypt. And we select the start date in 21 January 1st. And we have the end date.
We cannot see this interaction now. We only see the presentation. So maybe you can share your screen now so we can see the RASF, how it works.
Okay, let me see my new. Okay. Can you see now?
Yes, now we see that.
Yeah, okay. So what I have done here in the RAS, you can enter, let's go back a little bit. The link is in my presentation, or you can find it on the European Commission. And then you can select the origin, let's say Egypt. So I go down here, I click on Egypt. And I select the period where I want to have the information, and then I could select which type, but for the sake of easy, I didn't do. And then I click on search. So what I will see here quickly, what are the projects that are originating from Egypt? For instance, this was done yesterday. Romania has alerted that there are unauthorized substances like chlorpyrifos dimethoate and ometoate in oranges from Egypt. Or the same on the 4th of April. Or there was fluacifop in spring onions from Egypt that was alerted by Germany, and so on and so forth. And if you see, end of March, we had aflatoxins in groundnut, and that's a serious issue and will lead to border rejections, or can lead to recalls of the product. So this is just to show you what kind of information is there. And let me now go back to the presentation, maybe. Okay. Bit heavy. Okay, here I am. Can you see now the page? Yes. Exporting to EU? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So this is just to show you an EU official web page where you can get very specific information. From SGS side, we have, because EU information might not be sufficient for you as an exporter, and you might want to know a little bit more, or many companies need to know more what is going on in the world and not just in Egypt. So we have a separate we have developed a separate platform, which is called SGS Digi Comply, and I'll come back to it later, but also just to show you a little bit, and you see it on the screen here, but let me try to open this again. I'm here. So you see incidents. I went to the specific site already. The platform has much more information, but I see incidents. And if I want to know then from Egypt, you know, how many incidents, what type of incidents, where do I have them? I select here Egypt, so the country of origin. On the left side, you can see which were the reporting locations that we have in our system. So where did we find incidents? Which were the sources that we found? So you have USDA, you have some Arabic sources and so on. And then what are the products, which type of products and so on. And so you can go through, find much more, and then you can see the specific alerts or the specific information, like there is a controversy in Egypt and Bahrain over the contamination of foreign chocolate and so on. So this is just to show you there are different platforms, and I want to go back now to my previous slide. Okay, I think I have to go back here. So can you see the previous slide again?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Yeah. So there are different platform or information that you can find what is important, where are the issues if you want to grow your exports. And just to summarize from the EU, what are the recall reasons? As you can see in my selected area, 54% were on pesticides, and mainly it was chlorpyrifos, but also some others. And the type of products that you had are fruit and vegetables. I personally do think that while your exports to the European Union maybe are not the major part of your exports, many countries are following the legislation of EU. And hence, it is important to understand what is going on with your products in the European Union, or what are the legislation there, so that also for other countries, you can be ready to export. You might not have the same limit of pesticides in some other countries, like in China, but it's always a question of time when those regulations will come in. So it's always good to understand upfront what is going on. And just for instance, there are some restrictions, like in April 22, for imports from Egypt to the UK due to the pesticides in sweet peppers and due to aflatoxins in peanuts and ground flours. So it does have an impact what you can do. So it's always good to understand what's going on. Coming back a little bit to the general requirement, and I'll go over it pretty quickly. There are mandatory border controls only for live animals, plants, and plant products, basically because of phytosanitarian reason. Most products do not have mandatory controls, and they just need to follow the general EU legislation on hygiene and so on, which basically says the respective food business operator, or as I mentioned earlier, importer, is responsible for the food safety. You need to ensure the food safety throughout the food chain. And if you have, let's say, frozen or to be cooled product, you need to make sure that to maintain the cold chain at all stages. And then the others are basic HACCP principles. You need to establish or have a microbiological monitoring program, and you need to establish criteria and temperature control, so to manage your safety risk. For fruit and vegetables, these requirements are there as well. So you have the general requirements of the EU. And what is maybe different to other countries, or I'm not sure how it works in Egypt, is that there are specific marketing standards that you need to respect for fresh produce or fresh fruits and vegetables. If you export to the UK, you need to register under the beach system. For instance, if your shipment of fruits or vegetables into the UK from a non-EU country is not registered and you don't have a certificate through the beach system, you will not be able to import and to overcome the customs. Normally, you don't need a health certificate. And I say normally in the EU and UK, there are sometimes exceptions, but this is, again, you could see that on the alerts and on Digi Comply. Just to remind us, some principal hygiene requirements for food. On the primary production, there are, of course, the general requirements. Standards that are recognized largely in the EU are Global GAP standards. So if you have a certification of Global GAP, it's easier to export. It's not a big deal. Because it includes hygiene, it includes testing and so on. If you have organic standards, you would need to have a European certification because an Egyptian organic standard would not be equivalent at this stage. For food operators, for anything manufacturing, packing, and so on, there are also different standards that you could use, certifications, and SGS is offering those also in Egypt, like IFS, PRC, that can show compliance to the relevant requirements. The specific statements for the produce is more or less the standard requirement that, and it's common sense, I would say, but yeah, your product has to be intact, sound, clean, free from pests, blah, blah, blah. So all these standards are described very clearly, and these would be the things that are checked or that we could check in an inspection if you want to make sure that, you know, the product at the arrival in the market is not refused. There are some mandatory labeling requirements, and it's important to have the country of origin, also for produce that is sold loose to the retail, because the retailer in Europe needs to mention to the consumer where the country of origin of the product is. So this is important when you sell, for instance, pre-packed product, it must be labeled with the country in full, meaning Egypt, and the address and the name of the packer and so on. And also when it's sold in big bags or in packages, you know, you have to have the country of origin and the name and the address. SGS is offering, I'll come back to it later, also this labeling support, labeling services. A short update on the EU pesticides, because we have seen that you have quite a lot of, or the major part of your, let's say, issues in the EU where the EU alerts the consumers about products from Egypt is on pesticides. In general, any substance that is not approved in the European Union has a default limit of 0.01 milligram per kilogram. What you need to know here is that not all the substances, once they are approved in the European Union, will be re-approved automatically. And that's the case like for chlorpyrifos. And I assume that's one of the issues maybe that why we find so much, so many samples or so many products not meeting the requirements or on the alert list, is that since 2020, chlorpyrifos is not approved anymore. It was approved in the past, but it's not approved anymore. So now it defaults back to 0.01 milligram. Other renewals that are upcoming or non-renewals that are upcoming are indoxacarb and so on, so Mansozeb. Again, this is something that you can find on the European list, so it's public, it's nothing new, but it's good to have a look at what are the substances that are approved. And again, inside Digi Comply, you would be able to see which are the approved substances, what are the limits for your specific product, for the specific market, if you go to Europe, if you go to China, if you go to the US, what you can do, and you can find it very quickly. Maybe just for information, the European Union has also just issued, or it's just a draft, it's not even an official draft, it's a leaked draft that is coming up. The European Union wants to reduce by 50% the pesticides usage in general for the European Union. What could that mean? It could mean that on the one hand, the usage of pesticides as such in the European Union will be reduced, but also that more and more substances will be reduced or not further approved, because the overall aim is really to reduce the use of pesticides. Main drivers behind are the environmental impact, and there have been huge discussion of neonicotinoids on bees and so on. So this is a hot topic in the European Union, and for sure over the next couple of years there will be more and more regulation or restrictions in this area. Now let's jump over the Atlantic to the US. It works a little bit different. They have this new scheme of FSMA approved sites. So what is the main difference? On the one hand, you have the customs, and every product first goes into the customs that will check the country of origin and then assign the product to one of these agencies here on the right, depending on who is responsible for doing the next step in the import process. And for live animals and plants, you have APSIS, which has it's not checked by the customs, but it's checked by them. They check for diseases and insects in addition to the customs. On the product control, so you have for, let's say, poultry, processed egg products, and so on, some fish products. You have the USDA Food Safety Inspection Services, the FSIS. Egypt is on the FSIS list. That means you can import to the US, and they will say what you need to do. And I have one slide on that. Or for other products, you have the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, that is mainly handling all fresh and processed products. And then you have some other agencies which are maybe not as important. In general, for the US, you would need to have a registered broker, and you need to pay attention in the sense that that broker needs to be registered for the specific port that your product is going through. And this has to be a US citizen. The reason is this person or this broker will take over, will put a bond to cover potential costs of recall or for testing or whatever it is. You need to do an electronic filing, and when electronic filing is performed, you need to do origin labels, and you need to have the FDA registration if your product falls into the FDA category. And you need to have an import agent for the FDA. You must provide prior notice before the shipment of the product into the US, otherwise your product will be rejected. And the latest big change in the US legislation, let's say going on over the last 4 or 5 years, and with a stacked implementation, is really the FSMA implementation, where the facilities need to undergo they need to meet certain criteria, they need to have certain experts or certain quality responsible people, and they need to have a certain certification. Meaning, for instance, all importer or the importer must have also the relevant responsible person in the FSMA scheme for this product in order to be allowed to import. Again, here SGS can help you. We are accredited third party for FSMA certification, but we can offer also the testing. FSIS, you've seen they have the different product categories, or the fresh produce categories. In that sense, if your facility is not approved, you need to talk to your local Egyptian authorities, because they will provide the list to the US authorities of the approved facilities. And then again, there are certain minimum criteria, HACCP, food defense plans, you have to have a testing scheme, quality veterinary inspections, depending on what is, and so on. You have labels that must be pre-approved by FSIS. Before you export, you need to have the relevant health certificates and the import permit, as we discussed earlier. And then the product will go to an import house, and that will inspect your product from the FSIS. And then if they have this detention scheme, which I'm sure you have heard about it, if depending on how many cases, for instance, from Egypt, they have already seen in the past, they will increase their sampling. And also for the specific site, if your site has a first, second, third detention or outlayer, the product or the site might be stopped. Otherwise, if you have a good history, your sampling will be lower and you have more chance just to go quickly through, which is very important, of course, for fresh produce. What we support usually for this is we can help already upfront to make sure that on the analytical side, on the inspection side, your products comply. And we do a lot of inspections globally for products that come into the US, where we combine inspections and testing on site already in the country of export to make sure that there is no issue afterwards. Then, of course, in the US, you also have general food labeling requirements, basically 6 major requirements, and then there are some additional requirements from FSIS. It's always important also not to forget the California Prop 65 warning statement, which basically says, that you could have any chemical that somehow, even if it's not considered maybe an issue in Egypt and in other countries, but you need to have this statement: consuming this product can expose you to chemicals, including, and you need to explain here, could be a pesticide, but could be another treatment product in your processes, and then which are known in the state of California to cause cancer or birth. There is a list of those chemicals, and you need to put, if you have one of those things, you need to put the warning here onto the product. The last market I'm wanting to look at is China, and just a short update, because China is a very specific import market again. Recently, 1 year ago actually, Chinese authorities have published an update on, or a new regulation, the Decree 248 and the Decree 249 on the administration of import and export of food products, which is effective 1st of January 2022, meaning now for the last 3-4 months. And it means basically that any overseas manufacturer of imported foods shipped after that date needs to fill the Chinese registration number into the import, and there is a mandatory labeling requirement under this. So if you're shipping now products into China, you need to comply with this labeling requirement and register upfront your facility. There is the list of products that apply. So this list, there are many updates possible at any time. So we don't go into the details. I've just mentioned fresh and dehydrated vegetables, nuts, seeds, but you could see the list. And there is a specific process starting from a letter of recommendation from the local competent authorities until, you really get through. It's a little bit complicated, and SGS as a service then to the exporters to China. With our Chinese colleagues, we have established a service for the exporters to help them in this registration process. So now, how can we help how can the TIC industry to basically prevent claims, avoid recalls, avoid product loss, basically simply do successful business. If I look into SGS, and most of you or some of you for sure will know SGS, it's the world leader in the TIC industry. I'm part of a business unit, one of the 5 business units inside SGS that is called Health and Nutrition, which includes health science, cosmetic, crop sciences, and food. And we do have globally over 800 auditors, over 170 laboratories. We're present in more than 140 countries and with a long history, as you can see. Just very briefly here, what kind of services are we offering to support food manufacturers and food exporters and food importers? Of course, on the testing side, different testings. And we have seen the one important thing is the microbiological side. Some of the recalls that Egyptian products had in Europe were due to Salmonella or E. coli. So microbio is very important. Pesticides we have talked about, mycotoxins we have talked about, but there are of course many other parameters that are part of the services and that help you be successful. Certifications, we've talked about GFSI schemes, BRC, IFS and so on, many other schemes, Global GAP, but also social auditing and so on. Regulatory support, for product registration, like for China, for Dubai, other knowledge support, like with Digi Comply, or labeling support, whatever the support is needed, training support in different areas. Basically, on the testing side, what we do is really testing for safety, quality, and integrity. And we talk about chemical testing, pesticides, aflatoxin, vitamins, ETO, hot topic since the last 12 months, but also MCBD, MOSHMO, and many other complicated issues. Microbiological tests, of course, pathogens, allergens, especially an important topic in the UK. I think it's the most demanding market for allergens. Physical sensory examinations. There were also some, for instance, a product exported from Egypt to Poland that was leaking, that the tins were leaking. So that product, let's say, could probably have, the issue could probably have solved with a prior inspection. And general food integrity, really make sure that there is nothing else mixed in. We do have our laboratories and extensive compliance services and do perform inspection and sampling already today for food products that are exported out of Egypt. Our laboratory network, and it's a bit busy, this slide, but okay, what you see here, the pictures here is the laboratory in Dubai as one of the closest things and important for your target market that work for all the GCC countries, but we have also laboratories in Turkey that also support or supported all the exports into the Russian market. And of course, in Germany and many other EU countries, just to name a few, but also in the UK, in China, US, Canada, name it. What is important, I think, to understand is, on the one hand, whenever you do testing, that, and you see the laboratory network here, wherever the testing is done, that there is a very strict technical governance behind that allows you to have comparable results. Because it doesn't help, if we have a result that when the government is testing, they get a different result on the same method and on the same metrics. So we need to have a very strong, and it's one of our really key points, and I think key differentiates, very strong technical governance of all the labs so that we have comparable results and at the end, defendable results. Because if something happens, okay, if there is an issue, and you have, let's say, a pathogen in there, then let it be. But what you don't want to is that someone finds pesticides, which you don't have in there, and we need to have defendable results. And the other thing that is very important on the testing is that the laboratory needs to understand and cover the test methods of the market that you are selling to. Meaning for China, China is not using ISO methods. So if we do testing that for product that goes into the Chinese market, we need to use GB methods. If we do testing that goes into the US market, especially on the microbiological side, we need to use BAM methods in order to comply and make the results comparable to the US market. Europe is more on the ISO method. So this is, I think, important to understand that whatever you and wherever you test, that those results are acceptable in the market where you want to sell to. Just to expand a little bit on Dubai, they're just expanding right now into honey authenticity testing, which could also be interesting for Egypt exporters. And SGS Dubai is the only lab in UAE that can perform the hepatitis A testing, which I mentioned earlier for the French fries exports. This is just to show you some of the test categories that we cover in which countries, what we rely on, so what we can find solutions to whatever the problem is. Food labeling, what is the purpose of the labeling is really for the authorities. They want to protect the public health, protect the consumers. Labels shall provide information, they shall, and the most important thing is prevent misleading and deceptive labeling, and then you have nutritional values. There are, depending on the country, very different layouts, requirements, and so on. And we also, for the exporters, need to pay attention to the inner and the outer labeling so that they are consistent. There is no discrepancy in between and so on, and to offer all this in the different services. SGS is offering this in more than 80 countries worldwide. So we have labeling services, and usually, like for Egyptian exporters, we would help you with our affiliate in Egypt that would link to our network behind, and we have automatic systems behind that help us manage these projects in swift ways. The other thing we have briefly mentioned was Digi Comply. I'm just looking at the watch, how much time I have. Digi Comply basically is what we call a food safety intelligence platform. And it goes into, as you've seen earlier, risk prediction, but it can show you, you have all the food legislations from more than 140 countries inside, specific information, everything in English language. So you have all the Chinese information in there, you have all the, let's say, Indian information, the Pakistani information, the Russian information, and so all in English inside. And you can find, for instance, the residues, pesticides in a fingertip, or the heavy metals, like for China, the heavy metals are a big topic of the authorities to comply with. While pesticides are maybe not so important, I mean, they are important, but compared to the European Union, not as strict. So you can find this information in Digi Comply, and in the sake of time, I think we'll just, anyone who is needed, we can organize a separate presentation on it. Food inspections, just to complement our services, is really before the production, but helping again to reduce the risk at the different levels. Auditing is an important part of our business. Also, SGS Egypt has a lot of offers here. So whenever you need BRC, Global Gap, FSC, SQF, whatever the type of certificates are that ensure that your products are recognized, we for sure can help you. And many of the TIC players in the market are present here, but SGS has the largest GFSI auditor network of the world. There are many other standards that we work on, so depending on the specific needs, and that I've gone through it, we could support and help you. Maybe an important point, because it's a bit specific, but important for you and for this market, I assume so, is the Halal Certification. SGS UAE is registered with the Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technology in accordance with the federal statutory bodies. to perform halal certifications. And this could also be interesting for these exports. Trainings, I mentioned earlier, we offer a wide range of trainings. Just to give you a flavor, here is for the US, because there are different needs, even formally different needs for a facility to show that people have been trained. So we have developed a catalog of trainings that we do both face-to-face and online in order to support exporters and manufacturers. And I think with this, I'm pretty done. I hope I respected my 45 minutes and hope, yeah, if you have any questions, I think now let's help. Maybe just very quickly before that, in case of contact needs, we have SGS Egypt, Abdelal Al-Sayed here to contact. But yeah, happy for every question.
Thank you, Ms. Anna. Very informative, very detailed. Of course, I'm sure there will be a lot of questions on the chat. And there are already some questions in English. So maybe we can start with these questions and others in Arabic. And I would kindly ask Mr. Abdelal Al-Sayed to moderate this part of question answers, because you're the expert. So if we just go to the chat and go to, the question here from Mr. Mahmoud Gamal, what is the regulatory, I cannot read it. What's the regulatory requirements for exporting food supplements, tablets and capsules to KSA, UAE and USA for both the product and factory?
Yeah, in general, I would say very specific question, very good question. In general, the KSA requirements you have seen basically covers also the food supplements. The specific requirements for your specific product, because you have to go through this certification process, I would suggest really that we can link you up with our colleagues in Dubai via Abdelal, via SGS Egypt, and they can give you a template exactly what kind of certificates, what kind of test reports they would need for the specific project. But it's part of the SDA, and then depending on really on which specific product we are talking about, you need to go through this certification process.
Great. There is another question from Mr. Amr Rizana. For compliance certificates to GCC, does it require 3 types of certificate scopes? For example, for product certification, the ISO 17065 apply. For quality control, ISO 17020. For laboratory, ISO 17025. Are those applicable in the case of issuing certificates of compliance?
Well, the point is you have a final certificate, and the final certificate is based on, I should not say maybe sub-certificates, but it's based on other information. If you take the case of testing, the testing that is performed, that is required, so the proof that the product on the testing side is correct, needs to be performed on an ISO 17025 accredited laboratory. So the test certificate, you don't need yourself the 17025 accreditation or certification, because this is applicable for the laboratory that the laboratory needs to comply with. So but you will need test reports that are issued by a laboratory that is ISO 7025. So all this ends up into the final certificate. For the specific, again, I think my colleagues, I would refer to my colleagues in Dubai, can help much better on, for again, by the product, which certificate you need. But at the end, you have a final certificate, and the underlying documentation needs to comply with certain quality requirements.
I have another question here, but it just came privately about the Digi Comply platform of SGS. Is it free of charge? Any company can access?
There is a very high level free of charge access. So if you type in Digi Comply into Google, you can find it easily. But of course, if you want to see what I have shown you, you will have to pay a license. You know, we're a private company, so we need to finance the development. We've been working on it over the last years. So depending also on the level of access that you want, there are different licenses.
Great. Maybe we'll get back to this. Is there any other questions, or even in Arabic? Or Mr. Abdelal Said, would you like to add anything for the...
طبعا رمضان مبارك عليكم كلكم وكل عام وانتم بخير. Thank you very much May, و thank you للتيم على الorganization الرائع بتاع النهارده. و thanks Anna for the very informative presentation. أنا من وجهة نظري إن إحنا في أكتر من توبيك كتير متعلق بالتجارة الدولية ومتعلق بتسهيل التجارة الدولية في هذه البرزنتيشن. الميل بتاعي عند حضراتكم. كل اللي لاقي توبيك كويس، لأن هي أنا في البداية قالت إن هي عايزة days and days علشان تقدر تقول القصص دي كلها، يعني إنها تكون فعلا حاجة. إحنا عطينا information النهارده، دبي بتعوز إيه، أمريكا بتعوز إيه، روسيا بتعوز إيه. الإيميل عند حضراتكم، كل اللي شايف حاجة أولا، والتليفون كمان، يعني اني تايم اللي عايز يسأل، لأن في بعض الحاجات حتى الإجابة السريعة عليها ما تنفعش، لازم زي ما هي قالت ابعت معرفش إيه، ابعت لسبيسيفيك برودكت، ابعت للي مش عارف الشهادة، الديستنيشن اللي أنت بتتكلم عليه. فإحنا برضو على قد ما عندنا من معلومات، لكن احنا always to address our services للستاف بتاع البلد نفسه، SGS في نفس البلد اللي هي تريجوليت الكلام ده، فهيجي لك الحاجه بالظبط سهله جدا جدا وبسيطه. كل ما هو يتعلق بالبلاتفورمز بتاعت الكومبلاينس، حضراتكم مشكورين. كل اللي شايف ان في توبيك كويس يبلغ الاستاذه مي، وبناء عليها ممكن تتواصل معنا. ممكن نعمل قدامنا السنه طويله، يعني ممكن نعمل اكتر من برزنتيشن with يعني بليجر ان احنا ننظمها، وما فيش اي مشكله في اي حاجه، واحنا تحت امركم.
شكرا جزيلا. هو احنا الحقيقه برضو يعني عايزين جايز بدري شويه ان احنا نقول، بس احنا ان شاء الله يبقى في تعاون مع SGS بالذات في مجال التدريب. يعني
طبعا حضرتك شفتي يعني احنا مشهورين في القصه بتاعت التدريب اللي هو خاص بالانترناشونال سيرتيفيكيشن. يمكن احنا عندنا اكاديمي كامله في مصر بخصوص المانجمنت سيستم المختلفه، الايزو والسيفتي والانفايرمنت. لكن احنا كمان زي ما اتفضلت أنا عندنا very specific تريننج على الفود كومبلاينس وعلى التستنج وعلى القصص دي كلها. مش مفهوم ان انا بسوق خدمتي، لا، الكونفورمتي بصفه عامه بتبتدي من السبلاير ديكلاريشن لحد حاجات كتيره قوي. يعني فنفسه المصنع او المصدر لازم يكون الخطوات كلها بتاعت الكومبلاينس بتتم من خلال well trained people. فاحنا ممكن برضو نتكلم في للمجلس في الكورسات اللي تهم الساده الاعضاء، ونقدر ان احنا نتعاون فيها معكم، يعني مفيش اي مشكله.
طيب ممتاز. احنا ان شاء الله كده كمان هيبقى عندنا تدريب في مجال الفود سيفتي والليبلينج. طبعا زي ما انا قالت انه يعني اكبر المشاكل بتواجه صادراتنا سواء لامريكا او لاوروبا، بس جايز اوروبا فريش اكتر، بس امريكا كمان جايز اكتر موضوع الليبلينج.
ما هي الليبلينج دي بالظبط زي التأشيرة، يعني الليبلينج البداية، يعني زي الانتري فيزا اللي بيخش بيها. ما كانش في ليبل ريفيو، عندنا خدمة اسمها ليبل ريفيو. الليبل ريفيو احيانا ساعات بتوصل لدرجة انها ريفيو على الترجمة نفسها، يعني الترجمة ممكن تدي معنيين ما تمشيش مع المانيوال او اللي بيقوله هناك في بلد الوصول. فمرورا بقى بالنيوتريشنز ومرورا بكل ما هو بيكون في بطاقة التعريف بتاعت المنتج دي، فدي برضو حاجات ممكن نقدر نتعاون فيها كويس قوي قوي قوي.
هايل. شكرا. هل في أسئلة تانية من حضراتكم؟ وإن شاء الله طبعا احنا هنبعت البرزنتيشن دي صح صح مستر عبد العال؟ احنا ممكن
Yes please, yes please. feel free انك انت to distribute. وكمان انا يعني بقول لحضرتك الميل موجود، الناس تقرا وتشوف، وكل اللي مثلا، لان الوقت فعلا الماتيريال هي انفورماتيف قوي لكن ما دخلناش في الديتيلز كتيره، فكل واحد شايف عايز الحاجه اللي هي الكونسيرنز بتاعته تتوضح له. يسعدنا تماما نتلقى الأسئلة، وإجابة الأسئلة دي تروح لهم بالإيميلات، وتكون كمان حاجة مسؤولة مننا، يعني بنجاوب على حاجة بصورة اوفيشال وبصورة صح، وبياخد الموضوع يقدر يستفيد بيه.
هايل. Thank you, Anna, very much for your time and the very informative presentation. Thank you for Mr. Abdelal Sayed and also the team of SGS and also the Food Council's team for organizing this event today. And we will share the presentation with everybody. We will share the contacts of SGS Egypt for other questions. And very soon, because we have a meeting tomorrow with the SGS concerning training and several other topics to cooperate and assist the companies on a high level, because actually we're targeting to do some training on certain certifications. We're also intending to do how to enter a certain market. And also there is another program called Trade. It's a USAID program to assist companies also to enter the USA market and other markets as well. And they will also focus on the issue of labeling. We just had a meeting with them and it's actually planned very soon. And we're looking forward to cooperate also with SGS in this respect, inshallah.
احنا from our side احنا we يعني are very open mind to discuss any point that can promote the exportations. We can give also the awareness and the orientation in terms of importation as well, because it's the raw material is very important. And if we يعني intended to export good products, it means also we have to focus on the raw material, يعني especially this time.
Yes.
فاحنا we are waiting you. Again, you are most welcome to discuss any point that can contribute positively to the market.
Thank you very much. So thank you all again, and we'll see you next Wednesday إن شاء الله الأربعاء الجاي بإذن الله الساعة 11 ل 12. هنبعت لحضراتكم الموضوع اللي جاي من شركة شحن، شركة ترانسمار معانا بإذن الله. وبرضو أحب برضو فرصة إن أنا أقول لكم إن إحنا إن شاء الله شركات اللي بتصدر أغذية، اللي عاوزة تصدر أغذية وسواء بروسيست أو فريش، إن شاء الله إحنا عندنا تريد ميشن للأردن آخر مايو، والحقيقة دي هتبقى B2B meetings مع شركات من الأردن، وإحنا برضو عازمين شركات من سوريا ومن العراق ومن فلسطين. فإن شاء الله برضو هنراسلكم، وإحنا برضو هنتعاون مع SGS، ما عندهم مكتب كبير في الأردن، فإن شاء الله هيبقى فيه برضو تعاون معهم في المجال ده، وعندنا اجتماع الأسبوع اللي جاي وهنوافي حضراتكم بالتفاصيل. فلو تحبوا تحطوا حضراتكم الإيميلات بتاعتكم برضو على الشات بحيث نقدر نتواصل، أو ابعتوا لنا إيميل لو في أي أسئلة لحضراتكم. شكرا جزيلا. Thank you very much and wishing you all a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
كلام عاطل. نعم كلام عاطل. لا انا عايز نعرف البتاع تاني بالظبط. انا لو قلت له ردك ده هيتوحش. اسالك بقى عجز وجالك بقول لك ايه